is the year 2737 BCE, and Shen Nong, a mythological Chinese emperor, was sitting under a wild tree. That was when a leaf from the tree blew into his pot of boiling water, brewing into the drink that we now know as tea. Of course, this is just a legend, but history shows that tea has been around for thousands of years, with the earliest physical evidence dating back to 200 BCE China. Nowadays, tea is the second most consumed beverage in the entire world. But more than just your tea bags or iced tea, there's a whole world of Chinese specialty tea steeped in a long-standing tradition. This is an introduction to Chinese tea. Let's first define Chinese tea. Chinese tea, in its most basic of definitions, is tea that is produced in mainland China and to an extension, Taiwan. But before we dive into the depths of the Chinese tea realm, we first have to zoom out and view the tea landscape of the entire world. First of all, China is the biggest producer of tea in the world, with an incredibly wide variety of teas drunk nationwide and exported to other countries. Some of its most well-known teas include Pu'er, Tieguanyin, and Longjing. Across the Taiwan Strait, teas like High Mountain Oolong and Oriental Beauty reign supreme. Moving to South Asia, we have India, the second largest tea producer in the world, who is well known for its masala chai as well as their Darjeeling and Assam teas. Across the Palk Strait, Sri Lanka is most famous for its Ceylon black tea. Moving to Southeast Asia, tea-producing countries like Thailand or Vietnam produce Thai oolong tea or Vietnamese lotus green tea. Up north, Japan is most famous for their matcha and gyokuro, while South Korea produces their own green teas such as Ujon or Sejak. There's more tea to be found away from East Asia, with the Middle East playing host to a sizable amount of the world's tea production due to countries such as Turkey or Iran, known for their Ritza black tea and Persian tea respectively. Down in Africa, Kenya is by far the biggest producer of tea on the continent, with Kenyan black and Kenyan white teas just examples of what they produce. In Europe, however, tea production is sporadic, notably coming from Georgia in the east, with its green and black teas most popular, as well as the Azores Islands in Portugal to the west, again producing mostly green and black teas. Across the Atlantic, Argentina is the only country in this region listed in the top 10 biggest tea producers in the world. Its teas, however, are mostly used for ready-to-drink and iced teas. Argentina and the surrounding region are also the home of yerba mate, a herbal tea prominent across South America. To the north, the United States surprisingly produces tea as well, but most of its production comes from small-scale commercial farms in South Carolina and Hawaii. All this accounts for around 3 billion cups of tea consumed daily across the world, a number that is only growing each year. Among that, 75% of the tea consumed in the world is black tea, with 20% being green tea and 5% going to other varieties such as oolong or herbal teas. Now that we've seen how tea has spread all over the world, let us zoom back into the birthplace of tea, China. As mentioned earlier, The first physical evidence of tea in China dates back to the 2nd century BC, coming from the mausoleum of Emperor Jing of Han in Xi'an, which indicates that tea was already prevalent and consumed by the emperors in the Han dynasty. Written records indicate that tea was already consumed much earlier, potentially dating back to the 10th century BC. Tea in China was mainly used as a medicine early on, but slowly became consumed as a beverage in the Tang dynasty. Tea was prepared very differently back then, with the tea leaves grounded up and boiled in a cauldron, or even cooked together with various spices and herbs. Methods of brewing tea slowly adapted over time, where steeping tea leaves in hot water is now common practice today. However, we haven't fully answered the question of what tea is just yet. Tea typically is defined as a beverage prepared by pouring hot or boiling water over fresh or processed tea leaves or twigs. What are tea leaves, you may ask? Well, tea leaves come from this plant, the Camellia sinensis plant, a species of shrub or tree under the Tiaceae family, also known as the tea family. The Tiaceae family houses other species of the Camellia genus, most notably Camellia thaliensis, Camellia oleifera, as well as ornamental species such as Camellia japonica. Camellia thaliensis is the only other species mainly used in tea production. Native to Yunnan, the species is mainly used to produce local white tea, black tea, and pu'er tea. Camellia oleifera, on the other hand, is used to produce tea seed oil, which main uses include cooking as well as in some manufacturing sectors. What is truly considered tea only comes from the Camellia sinensis species, although leaves harvested from the Camellia thaliensis species are generally considered tea as well. It is debatable whether true tea can be made from any other species of the genus. This is also why herbal teas such as chamomile or rooibos aren't considered real teas, falling under the category of tisanes, despite most people using the blanket term tea for all these beverages. Taking a closer look at the Camellia sinensis species, tea is mostly harvested from its two main varieties, Camellia sinensis var sinensis and Camellia sinensis var assamica. The first variety, var sinensis, is also known as the Chinese variety of tea plants. They are grown all across China and Taiwan and in some areas of India such as Darjeeling. Meanwhile, var assamica, native to the Assam region in India, is mostly grown in India and Nepal, with varietals growing across the border in Yunnan and even in Taiwan. Var sinensis leaves are typically smaller and thinner, ranging from 4 to 14 cm long, and are mainly used for the production of greener teas such as green teas or green oolongs. They are typically grown at higher altitudes or in colder climates. Var assamica leaves are typically larger and thicker, ranging from 7 to 22 cm long, and are mainly used for the production of black teas as well as pu'er. They are typically grown in hotter and more humid climates. Do note that these differences are vastly simplified for the sake of this video. Along with these two varieties, two others are lesser mentioned, namely Camellia sinensis var purpulimba and Camellia sinensis var homogenesis. These, however, are dwarfed in quantity by the two other aforementioned varieties. Below these are thousands of different cultivars, short for cultivated variety. They are varieties cultivated intentionally by farmers through crossing and propagation by cuttings or by complete accident. Different cultivars elicit different flavors and characteristics in the final product, allowing for a wide variety of different teas to be produced and sold. In China and Taiwan, we can separate these cultivars into 3 different categories: small leaf varietals, medium leaf varietals, and large leaf varietals. Some of the more famous cultivars include Tieguanin, Longjing No. 43, and Qingxin under the small leaf varietal, Dark Aroma and Rougui under the medium leaf varietal, and Yunnan Dayazhong and Shi Dayazhong, as well as Assamica No. 8 under the large leaf varietals. These different cultivars can then be harvested and processed in different ways to produce unique teas. Here is a map of China showing the different categories of cultivars grown all across the nation. In areas further northeast, such as in Jiangsu and Shandong provinces, teas made from small leaf varietals are grown, harvested, and produced. Heading in the southwest direction, a higher amount of teas made from the medium leaf varietals are produced in provinces like Fujian and Guangdong. Heading further southwest, a higher amount of teas made from large leaf varietals are produced in provinces like Yunnan. This gradient can be explained by the shift in temperature in these regions, with the colder and drier environment further up north being more suited for small leaf varietals, while the hotter and wetter environment down south being more suited for large leaf varietals. Now, let's take a look at the same map but for Taiwan instead. You can see that the type of cultivars grown across Taiwan aren't exactly separated by something as simple as north to south. However, the picture becomes much clearer when you overlay a relief map over the island. As you can see, teas made from small leaf varietals tend to be produced in regions of higher altitude such as Alishan or Lishan, while teas made from large leaf varietals tend to be produced in regions of lower altitude such as Yichi or Hualien. This again shows that colder environments tend to be more suited to grow teas made from small leaf varietals, while hotter environments tend to be more suited to grow teas made from large leaf varietals. Now that we've talked about what tea is, let's take a look at the different types of Chinese tea. Chinese tea can be split into 6 separate types, namely green tea, oolong tea, black tea, dark tea, white tea, and yellow tea. Their names are quite self-explanatory, based on the color of either the dry tea leaves or the color of the tea liquor. The only exception to this is oolong tea, with oolong directly translating to black dragon. There are a few stories as to why the name oolong came about. One simply refers to the shape of some variations of the dry oolong tea leaves, black in color and resembling a mythical Chinese dragon. Another story suggests that oolong tea got its name from a farmer named Liang, later shortened to oolong, who discovered the tea by accident. No matter what the actual origin story may be, oolong tea is the most diverse type of tea among the 6 categories. Let's look at why. Simplifying it a bit for the sake of this video, green, oolong, and black tea are processed quite similarly to each other, with one key difference: the level of oxidation. You may know of oxidation when it comes to something like iron, a metal that turns into rust as it oxidizes. However, foodstuffs like fruits and vegetables can oxidize as well. In most cases, oxidation causes the produce to turn rancid. But in the case of tea, oxidation alters the chemical profile of tea leaves, in turn altering the flavor profile and characteristics in the cup. Once the tea leaves are plucked, cell walls start to break down, exposing enzymes within to the oxygen in the air, causing the leaf to turn brown in a process known as enzymatic browning. This process stops when the tea leaves are heated, denaturing the enzymes and preserving the oxidation level of the tea leaves. For green tea, the tea leaves are completely unoxidized or minimally oxidized. With oxidation not occurring, the leaves remain green from start to finish. For oolong tea, the level of oxidation ranges from around 10 to 80%, which is why oolong tea is the most diverse type of tea. This means that the final product can look anywhere from green to brown to almost black in color. In black tea, which is sometimes called fully oxidized tea, the level of oxidation ranges from around 80 to 95%. This level of oxidation cannot happen naturally, which is why oolong and black teas are rolled or tumbled with various levels of intensity and frequency, causing the leaves to bruise and in turn further damage the cell walls, allowing for a greater degree of oxidation to take place. Another interesting thing about black tea is that it's actually called Hong Cha in Chinese, which directly translates to red tea in English. Its name comes from the red color of the tea liquor when brewed. However, the Western world calls this type of tea black tea, in reference to the color of the dry leaves. You might get some confused looks if you call red tea, as it is known in China, as black tea or hei cha, as the term hei cha actually refers to a different type of tea. Hei cha or dark tea is a different type of tea when compared to green, oolong or black tea. It is also known as post-fermented tea, and as the name suggests, the main defining factor when it comes to this type of tea is the level of fermentation. You may be wondering, what is the difference between oxidation and fermentation? In fact, these two terms get mixed up a lot in the tea world, but there is a simple distinction between the two. Oxidation, as discussed earlier, is the process in which exposure to oxygen results in changes to the chemical composition of tea leaves. Fermentation, on the other hand, is the process in which microbial activity results in a breakdown and decomposition of chemicals in the tea leaves. Most teas do not undergo fermentation, as moisture that is necessary for microbial activity to occur is removed in the process of making the tea. For the case of dark tea, however, semi-processed tea leaves are intentionally piled in big heaps in hot and humid environments, with the heaps sometimes even being sprayed with water, allowing microbial activity to thrive and fermenting the tea leaves at an accelerated rate in a weeks-long process known as wet piling. Fermentation can also occur when a small level of moisture is left in the tea leaves after processing, allowing microbes to ferment the tea over time. The most famous example of this is raw pu'er. These kinds of teas are typically compressed into circular discs called tea cakes and stored in large quantities in warehouses across East and Southeast Asia, taking decades for it to resemble anything like its wet pulp counterparts. However, this traditional way of fermentation, also known as aging, allows the tea to develop vastly more complex flavor profiles over time, just like a finely aged wine. This makes these kinds of teas some of the most expensive teas ever, with some cakes even selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars in auctions. As these teas aren't wet pulped per se, it is debatable whether they should be called dark tea. but I think it definitely falls under the post-fermented tea category. White tea is very different compared to the types of tea mentioned earlier. One of the most delicate tea varieties ever produced, these teas are the most minimally processed of them all. After harvesting, the tea leaves wither for 3 days and are then dried to halt the oxidation process. This creates arguably one of the freshest kinds of tea that showcases its delicateness and nuance in a cup. Some white teas are also aged in a similar way that tea producers age raw pu'er, compressed into tea cakes and fermented slowly over time, with a small amount of moisture present to allow microbes to do their thing. Yellow tea is the rarest type of them all, with a unique making process that is incredibly time-consuming and labor-intensive compared to the rest. The process starts similar to green tea, but is followed by a special process called smothering. The warm and half-dried leaves are wrapped in papers or cloths and stored in a tightly controlled and monitored environment. This causes non-enzymatic oxidation or browning to occur, where a set of chemical reactions take place to form brown compounds, flavor molecules that affect the sensory qualities of tea. This is also more commonly known as the Maillard reaction. The producers of yellow tea tend to be quite secretive about this process, known as menhuang in Chinese, making it hard to fully understand what makes yellow tea so special. If you'd like to learn more about each type of Chinese tea, we will dive deeper into the different types in separate videos. You've gotten your hands on some specialty tea from China or Taiwan. And the next question you may have is, how do I brew it? Well, there are 4 main ways that Chinese teas are brewed. And let's start with the easiest and probably most familiar to those who are unaccustomed to Chinese tea. Western style is probably the easiest brewing method. Armed with a big teapot, preferably with a filter or a mesh to hold loose tea leaves in, and your favorite mug, you can conveniently brew a decent mug of tea or 2. This style is good if you don't have that many loose tea leaves, or if you have to serve tea to a big party. It's easy, quick, and able to be done without much thought. You simply have to put your loose tea leaves into the filter inside the teapot. Pour hot water into the teapot, typically 85 to 100 degrees Celsius depending on the tea, and wait 3 to 5 minutes, again depending on the tea, before pouring your tea out into your cup or mug to enjoy. A good estimate when brewing in this way is to use 1 to 2 grams of tea leaves per 150 ml of water. Compared to other brewing styles, Western brewing is generally less expensive as it only requires cheaper teaware and utilizes a lesser amount of tea leaves. However, using a lesser amount of tea leaves and higher amount of water will affect your brew in more ways than one. This lower leaf to water ratio will in turn force you to steep tea leaves for a longer amount of time to reach your desired brew strength. And you can imagine that the flavor profile of your brew will be less complex and nuanced compared to styles using a higher leaf to water ratio. And although you may be able to brew more tea out of lesser tea leaves, you can only steep the tea leaves once or twice, which at the end of the session may even come out to less tea brewed compared to styles where you can re-steep your tea a higher amount of times. There are other disadvantages to Western style brewing, but we first have to dive into a style that is quite the polar opposite. Gongfu style brewing, which directly translates to skill or effort is the go-to style in China when it comes to brewing Chinese teas. Here is a rough idea of what you will need to brew tea the Gongfu way. First, a tea tray or at least a waste bowl to catch excess water or tea that we won't drink. We then need a brewing vessel which comes in the form of a gaiwan, which is a bowl-shaped vessel that has a lid and handle that covers it, and typically a coaster below. Most gaiwans are 100 to 200 ml in volume, typically made of porcelain, but glass, stoneware, and clay gaiwans are used as well. Another form of brewing vessel used in Gongfu cha is a small teapot, again around 100 to 200 ml in volume and are typically made from clay, although teapots made from other materials are used from time to time, notably silver teapots. These vessels are where your leaves meet hot water to brew your cup of tea. Next, we need a vessel to pour our finished brew out. While you may think that you could just pour your brew directly into a cup, this may not be the most practical way of doing things, as your cup size may not be able to hold the entire volume of tea brewed, or you may need to serve multiple guests and pouring directly into their cups from a piping hot gaiwan may become unwieldy. This is where a fairness cup comes in, known as a cha hai or gong tao bei. These vessels are silos for brewed tea, where finished steeps can wait patiently as you drink slowly, or where multiple steeps can be mixed together to provide enough tea for a large group of people. They should be able to hold a higher volume of tea compared to your brewing vessel and are typically made of glass. However, people tend to collect different fairness cups made out of different materials or colors to match their gaiwans or teapots. They also conveniently come with a small spout, making it easier to pour tea out. To complete your basic tea set, you need a teacup, typically ranging from as small as 20 ml to 200 ml or larger. These vessels are where you drink your tea from. These teacups can be made from a wide variety of materials such as glass, porcelain, stoneware, or clay, but they typically match the material of other tea vessels in your tea sets. Outside of this basic tea set, other tea utensils will make your Gongfu cha experience easier and nicer. A tea strainer, typically made from stainless steel and mesh, is typically placed on top of a fairness cup to catch stray loose leaves flowing out of a brewing vessel while allowing the brewed tea to flow down into the fairness cup. A cha is a kind of presentation vessel where the desired amount of leaves are weighed and shown to guests partaking in the tea session. They are typically made out of wood or porcelain and act as the vessel from which the leaves are held temporarily, waiting for the brewing vessel to be fully prepared, which is when the leaves are transferred and the brewing starts. The cha is typically accompanied by other tea tools like a teaspoon used to transfer tea leaves from the cha to the brewing vessel, tweezers to lift piping hot tea vessels without scalding yourself, and a needle to remove leaves that may be caught in the spout of a teapot. Another item that many people have in their tea sets are tea pads, which are unglazed clay figures that typically come in the shape of an animal. Some people have it to supposedly give them good luck, while others simply have it because it's cute and keeps people company when drinking tea alone. Its unglazed properties allow the tea pads to change color when coming into contact with hot water, which is a nice gimmick, with some even squirting water out in a peeing fashion when hot water is poured onto it. All these different teawares make up a Gongfu tea set, to be used in every Gongfu tea session. Gongfu style's marked difference compared to Western style is its much higher leaf to water ratio. A good estimate when brewing this way is using 5 to 6 grams of tea leaves per 100 ml of water. This in turn means that steeping times are considerably shorter, around 30 seconds for the first few steeps, and are required to be more precise to achieve the desired flavor profile, with oversteeping resulting in an overly bitter brew for certain teas, with others being too strong to be palatable when brewed for too long. This style obviously comes with downsides. If you are looking for a quick cup of tea, you won't find that here, as full Gongfu sessions can last for upwards of 2 hours or more. A tea set can be put together for quite cheap, but it can get really expensive really fast as you delve deeper into things like using clay teapots. However, the upsides are abundant. If you are looking to enjoy the art of tea and see tea more as an experience rather than a drink, Gongfu Cha is the way to brew and experience Chinese tea. With the shorter steep times and higher leaf to water ratio, you can re-steep your tea leaves a handful of times, with some leaves even holding up past steep number 20 or more. With that, although you may only be brewing 100 ml of tea at a time, you may end up being able to brew a liter or two of tea by the end of your tea session. With a higher amount of steeps, each cup that you drink will be different in its own way. Tea leaves slowly release flavor chemicals into each brew, with some releasing faster than others. With shorter steep times, each steep will produce a slightly different brew, allowing you to appreciate the nuance and complexity of each tea. For example, your first few steeps could produce a relatively bitter and aggressive cup. In later steeps, however, you may find some underlying sweetness in your brew. If you brew the same tea in Western style, you will lose out on the complexity of these teas, especially for tea leaves that are of higher quality. This is one of the main appeals to Gongfu brewing, not only for those who harvest and produce these teas, but for avid tea drinkers all across the world. Gongfu Cha is also about tea appreciation and a step-by-step process in doing so. But I'll delve deeper into that in another video for the sake of brevity. The third brewing style is called Grandpa style. It's probably the most casual of all, and you can do it only armed with a tall mug. Put your leaves in and pour hot water on top. That's it. Wait a few minutes and take a sip. Too strong? Add more water. Too weak? Just wait a bit longer. The idea is that you can top up the water as and when you want, balancing out the strength to your preferences. No need to deal with finicky leaf to water ratios, and you can brew easily on the go as well. Once you've drunk till a third of the mug is left, you can always top it up with more hot water. Rinse and repeat until the tea loses its strength. This style is actually quite common in China, mostly among those who do not have time for a full Gongfu session or for those who are constantly on the move. Its usage is mostly restricted to white, yellow or green teas. They are easier to brew and do not need a high amount of leaves to get a strong enough taste. Some teas are even preferred to be brewed in this style just because of how pretty it looks. Longting green tea or silver needle white tea are good examples. The downside is that you will definitely lose out on complexity and that you may get some leaves stuck in your teeth when you drink your tea, as the tea leaves may not necessarily sink to the bottom. All in all, a great way to brew tea at home, at work, or anywhere really. The last brewing style is the most ancient one of all. Boiling tea dates back to the Tang Dynasty and was one of the first ways that people prepared tea. Nowadays, this method is less used but can be great in its own right when done correctly. Simply prepare a teapot filled 2/3 up with water, heat it to a rolling boil or simmer, and add your tea leaves. Pour your desired amount into your teacup after 3 to 5 minutes. Top up the teapot with more water from time to time, and voila! You've ended up spending 3 hours slowly sipping away. Of course, not all teas are suitable for boiling. This method is only used for aged white teas, dark oolong teas, or dark teas. For aged white teas and oolong teas, it's preferred to use spent leaves after a Gongfu session, as boiling fresh leaves right away may result in an overly strong and astringent brew. Do also use appropriate teaware like clay teapots, as materials like glass will crack when placed under extreme heat. This is just one method to boil tea. Others add a pinch of salt to the brew, some add spices as well, and others refrain from keeping the water heated at a simmer. Whatever it is, you can try this method and find what works best for you. And that's all that we'll be covering today. Chinese tea is a vast and mysterious world full of things to learn and teas to try. One probably won't be able to do so in their entire lifetime, owing to its incredible variety and diversity, as well as its long and steeped history. This is just an introduction to Chinese tea, and I will definitely be diving deeper into it in further videos to come. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in another video.